Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming out today early this morning. My name is Shriver-Blake, and I'm a product manager on Firebase. I'm going to be joined on stage later today by McDonald, also a Firebase PM. And we are here to talk about using Firebase at work. You see, lots of people know that Firebase is a great way to build great apps. You can use products like Cloud Firestore and Cloud Functions to build scalable apps quickly without running your own backend servers. You can use products like Crashlytics and performance monitoring to understand and improve your app's quality. And you can use products like Google Analytics for Firebase and Firebase Predictions to understand and grow your user base. There's really a lot that Firebase has to offer. Unfortunately, too many people think that Firebase isn't ready for work, particularly at large organizations. I get questions all the time about security, compliance, and production readiness. And so today, we're going to answer some of those questions and arm you with the information that you need to use Firebase at work. We're going to specifically cover these three areas. Is Firebase ready for my organization? Can I manage and secure my resources in the way that I want to? Is Firebase ready for my lawyers? Can it meet my compliance and regulatory requirements? Is Firebase ready for production? Can I achieve production scale and monitoring with Firebase? We're going to answer these questions today. So let's dig into the first question. Is Firebase ready for my organization? Specifically, can you control access to Firebase resources and enforce organizational policies? The answer is yes. Firebase developers have access to the same powerful Google Cloud Platform tools to secure and access their resources in Firebase, which is great, right? And this works because when it comes right down to it, Firebase projects are cloud projects. And while we provide a simple and intuitive UI to help people onboard with the platform, it's all built on top of Google Cloud infrastructure. So those who need the power can use the Google Cloud Platform tools to manage their Firebase projects. Now, when it comes to managing and securing access to your projects, there are a few core cloud tools that you need to be aware of. First is Cloud Resource Manager, which allows you to centrally manage all of the projects in your organization. It allows an administrator to get visibility into every project they have, organize those projects into a hierarchy with folders, and then sign permissions and access at the folder, project, and resource level. Second is Cloud Identity, which provides centralized identity administration for orgs. It includes the ability to support single sign-on and enforce two-factor authentication. Now, many of you are probably using G Suite, which offers many of the same features and also works with Google Cloud and Firebase. Finally, there's Cloud IAM. Cloud IAM gives you fine-grained control of access to your cloud and Firebase projects. It allows you to do this by assigning roles to users and groups that give them specific and limited access. For instance, there's a role called App Engine Viewer that you might assign to a group and give pretty broadly within your organization. On the other hand, you might save an edit role for a smaller set of people who really need it. Now, if the predefined roles aren't quite for you, you can also define custom roles that have exactly the permissions that make the most sense for your organization. Finally, I'll mention that all permissions are logged, and we give you a full audit log of what was changed, when, and by who. Now, those of you who are familiar with Firebase probably know that today, Firebase does not support fine-grained roles or permissions, which really limits your options for controlling access. Well, today, we begin the rollout of fine-grained permissions for Firebase. We've defined a set of permissions like Stability Admin and Developer Viewer that allow you to grant access to a limited subset of Firebase. In addition, we're going to give you access to fine-grained permissions, so you can define exactly the roles that make the most sense for you. Now, we just started rolling this out today, and it may take a few weeks before you see it in your project, but I'm going to give you a demo so you know what to expect. Switch over to the screen, please. OK, so here I am logged into the Firebase console as myself, and I want to give Mike access to this project. So I'm going to go to Project Settings, Users, and Permissions. And this loads up a custom Firebase UI that makes it really easy for most Firebase users to add users to their Firebase projects. Let me go ahead and add a member. I'll include Mike. OK, and now I need to pick a role for Mike. And you'll see when I click on the role dropdown, we support the same project-level roles that Firebase has always supported, but we now can assign custom access to Firebase. Now, I only really need Mike to send notifications. And he wore a T-shirt and a hoodie for today's talk, so I'm kind of doubting his professionalism. So I'm just going to give him access to Grow and not give him access to our develop or stability products. So let me go ahead and save that. And switch over to Mike. So you can see in this window, I'm logged in as Mike. I'm in the same project. And because Mike has access to Grow admin, if I go to cloud messaging with Mike's account, he has full read-write access to view and send notifications. However, if I go to the develop section and I try and get in the database, I get access denied. So I can know that Mike's not mucking around in my data. Now, some of you are probably thinking that you need more fine-grained permissions for your organization. And we've got that covered, too, with fine-grained permissions and custom roles. Going back to my UI, I'm back in the Firebase UI for IAM. And roles are not in this UI. They're considered an advanced scenario. So I'm going to go over to advanced permission settings. And what this is going to do is open up the cloud IAM console. So these systems are working on the same backends, same users, same permissions. But the cloud console has a much broader array of features to help you control and manage access to your project. One of those features are roles. So I'm going to go ahead and click into roles. And you can see here the full list of roles that are predefined for my project, and also a role I created up here called Mike's Special Role that has specific permissions just for Mike. Now, you probably wouldn't make a specific role for one person, but you get the gist. You get the choice to define the roles the way you want with the permissions that you want. Finally, I mentioned audit logging. And we do offer quite a bit of audit logging for these scenarios. I'll go back to the Cloud Platform console, the dashboard, and there's another tab called Activity that I just clicked on. And this activity feed gives you a detailed rundown of administrative actions in your organization, including IAM changes. There we go. And so you can see there's a record for that last change that I made. Firebase John at Gmail removed Firebase Grow admin from Firebase Mike. Oh, that's interesting. That's why it didn't work. Anyway, you get the full view of everything that's happened in your organization so that your administrators can really keep an eye on what's happening. So can we go back to the slides, please? So a takeaway for you is that Firebase is ready for your organization because you can now use cloud powerful management tools to manage your Firebase projects and restrict access. OK, let's talk about the lawyers. If you've ever tried to deploy a new service in a large organization, you know that it can be a real challenge. If that service doesn't meet your compliance and regulatory requirements, it can be a complete non-starter. Add to that the complexity of GDPR, and the whole thing is really daunting. We want to make this as easy as possible for you. And to this end, the Firebase team has been investing a lot in compliance. And today, we're ready to meet many organizations' compliance needs. In addition, we've been particularly focused on how we can help you implement privacy best practices and be compliant with GDPR. Now, before I go much further, I want to make this really clear. I am not a lawyer, and this is not legal advice. And we're going to talk about general best practices, but really every case is different. So if you haven't had a conversation about these topics with a lawyer, I strongly suggest that you do. OK, so I had a funny experience this winter. I was at an indoor water park with my son, and we were waiting to get in line. And a couple behind me, who also must have worked together, started talking about GDPR in line at a water park. And they were really stressed out. They were talking about how much work they had to do, how many open questions they had, and how hard it was to get a clear answer to those questions. And I really could not figure out why they were talking about GDPR at a water park. And it was only later that I realized that I was wearing this GDPR T-shirt. So it was really my fault. My choice of T-shirt that day ruined that couple's vacation. I worked on GDPR for Firebase, and so I could relate. It's been a lot of work and a fair amount of stress. But with the benefit of the hindsight, I've come to view it as an opportunity. It's an opportunity to ensure that you're doing the right things for your users and their privacy. So what we're going to discuss today are privacy best practices and how Firebase can help you achieve them. Now, there's really a lot to consider with privacy, but I want to call your attention to these 3 areas that I think require specific focus. So 1, how can you ensure that the third parties that you rely on are doing the right thing with your users' data? 2, are you properly handling notice and consent from your users? 3, are you following best practices around transparency and control of user data? Let's dig into number 1. Today, it's almost impossible to build an app without relying on a third-party service. Many of you are probably using Firebase, Google Cloud Platform, and multiple other services in your app. Now, if those services have access to your user data, it's really important that you have a clear understanding of how that data is used and protected by those services. You also need to ensure that that use is consistent with your own terms of service, privacy policy, and consent experiences. So you really need to understand this well. So how can Firebase help? First, in order to help you be confident in our security and privacy practices, we've really made a lot of progress on getting certifications for Firebase. You can see we have a bevy of ISO and SOC certifications, and we've been steadily adding certifications over the past several months. In fact, just a few days ago, we added ISO 27717 and ISO 27718 to Firestore. And we're going to continue to make progress on those specific certifications over the next couple months. OK. One other thing I want to highlight in this area are DPSTs. DPSTs are legal agreements between you and your third-party service provider that govern how your data is protected and used by those services. If you're subject to GDPR, you need to have these types of agreements in place with your service providers. The good news is that Firebase makes this really easy. All of Firebase services are covered under a DPST, and they're included by default in our terms of service. So if you're using Firebase and you've accepted our most recent terms, you're covered under our DPSTs. OK, let's talk about notice and consent. I brought this up because notice and consent standards are really changing. And so if you haven't reviewed your notice and consent flows recently, I strongly suggest that you do that. The high-level goal here is to make it really clear to your users what data you're collecting and how that data is used. If you do need to get consent, you need to really focus in on that scenario and make sure that you're getting consent in an explicit and clear way from the users. Also, and this is something that people often miss, if you need consent, you need to make sure you're not gathering data before you get that consent. This one trips a lot of people up. Finally, you need to make sure that consent is recorded properly and that you can prove that you have it if you need to. We've been working hard to help our users and our developers with notice and consent. First, we have a number of products today that auto-initialize on launch, and therefore may start collecting data immediately from your users. You may decide that you need consent for that data. And so to give you the flexibility that you need, we've updated all of these APIs so that they can be configured to not auto-initialize. So you can get the user consent that you need and then go ahead and initialize those SDKs. In addition, we've launched an update to Friendly Picks that demonstrates how to track user consent using Firebase. For those of you who aren't familiar with Friendly Picks, it's an open source demo application built on the Firebase platform. It includes iOS, Android, and web clients, and it's available on GitHub at the URL on this slide. We hope that you'll take a look at it, and it makes it easier for you to implement this critical user experience. OK, finally, let's talk about transparency and control. The basic principle in this area is that it should be easy for your users to understand what data you have about them, and they should be in control of that data. So a great example of this is Google's My Activity site. It shows users a detailed view of all of their data on Chrome, Android, and Google Search, as well as other Google products. It's really quite an exhaustive set of data and provides a lot of transparency for our users. It also puts users in control. They can delete individual pieces of data or delete data in bulk. I think it's a really great example of how to implement transparency and control for your products. We want to help Firebase developers implement best practices in this area. And an update that we made recently was improving our support for deletion in a number of our services, particularly services like Crashlytics and Analytics. it's now possible in all of these services to delete data for a single user. So if you get a request to delete data, you're now empowered to do that. We've also launched a deletion and export guide. This guide walks a Firebase developer through the process of implementing user deletion and user export flows if they're using Firebase. You'll find it's actually quite simple to do using the power of cloud functions. And I'm going to give you a quick view of how it works. Now, before we jump into the code, I want to mention that this code is publicly available on GitHub and open source. So you can grab it today and start using it on your projects. I should mention that it also covers user-initiated export, which is another key user scenario for data control. The code itself starts out with this function that's responsible for initiating the delete. The really great thing about cloud functions is the amount of flexibility it gives you in how you trigger that function. In this case, we're taking advantage of the fact that Firebase auth is an event emitter. So specifically, this function will trigger when auth.user_onDelete gets called, or when that event gets emitted. And so the basic model here is you delete the Firebase auth user, this function kicks off and deletes the rest of their data. Functions does give you a lot of flexibility in this area, so you could also trigger this off of an HTTP request or using the client-side SDK. Once triggered, the code goes through and initiates wipeout calls for each one of the services that might be storing user data. Skipping down a bit, this is the database wipeout function. You'll see in the top bit, we're reading in a list of paths, and then we're iterating through each one of those paths and removing them from the database. But where do the paths come from? Well, they're here in userprivacy.json. You can see it defines the actual paths to delete. In this case, it's a path called users and another called admins. And in both cases, it's keyed off of the UID variable, so we're only deleting data for this specific user. Other products work in a similar way. So there's an example for storage here below, for instance, that will delete storage data for that particular user. So that's it. In a few lines of code, we're properly cleaning up our data when a Firebase user gets deleted. So the key takeaway for you is that Firebase is ready to meet most organizations' compliance needs. And we've provided a number of tools to help you implement privacy best practices and be compliant with GDPR. And now I'm going to hand it over to Mike to talk about taking your Firebase project to production.
Thanks, John. So John convinced your manager, their manager's manager, all of those pesky compliance officers in your org, and your legal team. But now, you have to come back to your team and convince your operations and DevOps folks that Firebase is ready to scale. Luckily, Firebase is built on top of Google Cloud, as John said, and it can scale to meet the needs of the largest customers, all without breaking the bank. Those finance folks are important, too. Firebase is built on top of Google Cloud Platform, specifically actually on top of a couple Google Cloud products. So Cloud Firestore is exposed both through Firebase and through Google Cloud. It's the same underlying database. And that provides the scalability that you need to start building on Firebase and scale into Google Cloud. But scalability is nothing without reliability. Firebase offers 99.9 and 99.95 SLAs on many of our paid products, and that's in line with Google Cloud and other cloud industry providers. While that's what we promise, people actually often see a lot better. So we're looking at a chart right now provided by Gartner. So Gartner's an industry analyst that's measuring uptime on various public cloud providers. So specifically, this is storage buckets. So for instance, Google Cloud Storage on GCP. For context, a 99.9% SLA is 9 hours of downtime. So that's 540 minutes. Over there in blue, so that's Google Cloud. That's 22 minutes of downtime, which is 99.995. So that's 4.5 nines of uptime observed over the year. And this is just an industry analyst literally querying a bucket, a couple times a second or a couple times a minute for a year. So this isn't Google measuring this. This is a third-party industry analyst. We also understand that sometimes you need to create resources in particular locations. Either you want to serve content directly from where your customers are, or you need to comply with legal regulations for various countries. Google Cloud Platform offers 15 different regions around the world, so all of those blue dots that you can see. And we've announced 4 additional regions, which are those white dots that are coming online in the near future. This GIF shows an example of creating a new storage bucket in the Firebase console. So you can say, hey, I want to create this new bucket. You can select the region, and you can see a number of multi-regional and regional deployments. You can select what type of bucket you want, and then create it in Firebase. In the near future, we expect that Cloud Functions and Cloud Firestore will also offer this capability. So now that we're comfortable creating resources and that we know, since they're backed by Google Cloud Platform, that they'll scale, we need to verify that the code that John wrote actually does what he says it does, right? You can't trust anyone who writes code while wearing a sport jacket. To do this, we'll use Stackdriver. So Stackdriver provides visibility into your production resources for the entirety of Google Cloud Platform and parts of Firebase. It does logging, monitoring, alerting, and also things like tracing, debugging, and performance profiling. Here's a quick reference of what Firebase services support which of those various Stackdriver integrations. We'll then dive into how each of them work. So earlier, John showed code that was deployed onto Cloud Functions. It handled wipeout. But we need to ensure that those wipeout functions are running and that they're not erroring out. Cloud Functions integrates really nicely with Stackdriver logging to give you real-time logs about everything that happens on every single function execution. As you can see, this is actually the FriendlyPix production backend logs. So we can see clean up account, moderate posts, send follower notifications, and we can see every time a function execution started, as well as all of the logs from both standard error and standard log. We automatically suck those up, so you don't have to write anything special in your code. You can just say standard console.log in JavaScript, and it'll log it. Or if something errors, we'll automatically pull that out and display it. That's a great view, but what happens if you want more proactive error reporting? So you can use Stackdriver error reporting to understand, hey, there's a new error. Here's exactly what's wrong. John's code may have been error-free, but that's not true for everything that we're running right now. We can see up at the top a bunch of open alerts that have been opened because our code has thrown an error. If we click on one of those, you can actually see that top one says, deletion of inactive user failed, error and internal error occurred, quota exceeded. So it tells us exactly what the problem is and how we can go and resolve that in the Google Cloud Console. It also tells us how many occurrences of the error occurred, when they happened, when the last one was. And I actually get emails for every single error that occurs in FriendlyPix. It's really nice. OK, we've seen logs. We've gotten error reports. Now we want to build dashboards to understand exactly how things are working in production. Stackdriver provides logging or monitoring and alerting with a bunch of different metrics about each of these Firebase and Google Cloud services. So you can create really granular dashboards that tell you exactly what's going on in your service. This slide is intended to be a little overwhelming to show you just how much information we're giving. I think the real-time database actually spits out about 20 or 25 different metrics that give you really, really fine-grained insight into what's going on in the database. Using the Stackdriver console, it's also really easy to create custom dashboards off of these metrics. And actually, in the demo that I'll show, we'll go into greater detail, and I'll make a new dashboard. But you can create things like in that top left, we're seeing how much data is stored in cloud storage in the real-time database, and we're setting an alert that says, hey, anytime something is over 5 GB of data stored, send me an email. You can configure those, again, those alerts, in the Stackdriver console. So on the left side, we're saying anytime a metric goes above that large number, which happens to be 5 GB, anytime that threshold is exceeded, send an alert to firebase.mike@gmail.com. There's a really cool feature of Stackdriver as well where you can actually add documentation. So if you have markdown docs, maybe your company stores everything in a wiki or other markdown, you can copy that in, and that will get sent along in the alert. So you can actually debug immediately once you get that alert. On the right, I've set up a bunch of different alerts. You can do some really simple things that are just basic conditions that say, hey, if this metric is over 5 GB for more than a minute, or this metric no longer exists, send me an alert. But you can also do more complicated things like velocity alerting. So I have an alert that says, if the number of connections to my database doubles in a minute, send me an email, right? Because that's sending me information that says, hey, I just got this huge load spike. Maybe I need to do something. Or, hey, the number of objects stored in my storage bucket has doubled. Maybe I want to move things around, or maybe I want to start eliminating old data. This is what one of those alerts looks like when it actually fires. So I run a couple production services. One of them, for instance, I run a Minecraft server. I got an email saying, hey, my server's down. What do I do? And as you can see, down in the bottom, I actually have documentation right there that says, is the VM up? So SSH into the VM and make sure it's up. Make sure the disks are mounted. Make sure that my systemd job is working perfectly. So it works for both VMs, but it'll also work for the various other cloud platform services that I mentioned. And then once you acknowledge it, you get another email that says, hey, the incident is over. Everything is fine. You can also do alerts to SMS, and I believe we have PagerDuty and other tools like Slack integrations that you can send them to kind of wherever is most convenient for your org. OK, so we built our app. It's running in production. It can scale. We have great visibility. Everything is going fine. You're sitting in your desk one day, and someone who kind of looks like John walks over and says, hey, how much is this going to cost? Right? Like, I have a bunch of questions. I need to go and report to my VP. Like, maybe this is or isn't going to work out. And they say, what's it going to cost over the next month or the next year? And you're sweating bullets. You go to the cloud platform website. Luckily, we have this awesome pricing calculator. So on both Firebase and Google Cloud Platform, you can kind of dial around and say, hey, based on the information I have in Stackdriver, it's kind of projecting that I'm growing at X gigabytes of data stored every month. Let's see what that looks like extrapolated over to 12 months, what it's going to cost me. And in the Cloud Platform pricing calculator, you can even start tweaking things like, hey, I want to now move this data to a cheaper storage class. Maybe it's not being accessed as frequently, so you can archive that data. That's going to be cheaper for you, and you can start doing that kind of thing. It's really, really awesome. And similar to Stackdriver, we had kind of the estimation portion. You can also set up billing alerts on top of that. So maybe you budgeted $1,000 a month for your storage costs. You can set up a budget that will send you a billing alert when you've exceeded that. It's really nifty. Let's actually see that. Switching over to the demo, we're going to go through all of those things just so that you believe me. OK. Here we are in the Google Cloud Console using Stackdriver logging. So you can see this massive, massive scrolling thing of all of my cloud functions. It's not just cloud functions. I can actually look that audit log that John showed earlier can show up in here, and I can get certain methods. I can get all of the kind of the Google Cloud Project things. I can see when service accounts were used. But let's focus on the cloud functions for a minute. Within that, you can also get per function logs. So as you can see, I have a ton of different functions running in FriendlyPix. Let's say I only care about all of the delete old posts functions. So I can filter based on that and see a list of every single one of those that's happened. We can go back to the full one. You can also see things registered by errors or warnings, so kind of filter based on that. I think there's some regular expression filtering as well. So if you know exactly what you're looking for, you can start typing and say, hey, let's see on succeeded. Succeed? Let's try that. Nothing found. Darn. OK, so logging. And then let's pop over to error reporting. So you can see FriendlyPix is throwing a couple errors in production. Let's see why those happen. There's an error permission denied. Last occurred about 20 hours ago. We can drop in. It'll load, and it'll tell us, hey, this port in your code. You can actually see a bunch of other errors that have been thrown. Maybe we should go and fix that. The other thing, you can say, hey, maybe I actually don't care about this. We'll mark it as resolved. Go back, and it no longer shows up. So we filtered. Maybe I actually do care about the resolved. I can see it there. So it's a nice way of actually managing kind of the day-to-day operations of your application. OK, let's pop over to the Stackdriver console. And you can see that same dashboard that I showed you earlier. We have data stored. We have bandwidth. We have the number of database requests. We have the number of storage requests. I want to know when are my functions executing and what's happening to them. So I'm going to go and say, add a chart. We'll call this functions, executions, cloud functions. And you can see that we have a metric called executions. That's a count of executions broken down by status code, for instance. And you can actually see the name of the function and the value in kind of number of executions per second. If I wanted to, I could also group by, say, the function name. And you'll get not only, this is kind of the aggregate sum of all of the things that are happening in my function. But I could, if I wanted to, instead filter by give me functions that are OK. So only give me the functions that are succeeding, or only give me the functions that are failing. And maybe here I also want to group by the function name. So this will give me just the number of functions that have succeeded grouped by function. And we will save that. And it'll actually give me the historical information as well. So you can see this one particular day, May 7th, a couple days ago, we had a huge spike. And we were getting 2 cleanup account requests every second for this little period of time. And actually, you can see that there's a sliding line on the screen. So you can actually time correlate across different things. You can also kind of zoom in and see, hey, I want to look at this particular time. So it looks like between about 2 p.m. And 2:10 p.m., we had a huge spike. And that corresponded to a bunch of changes in the database, a bunch of changes in storage, and our function executing. So it's really nice. If you get an alert, you can then pop over to the dashboard and see exactly kind of what's going on across the different products. Speaking of alerting, we can hop over. We can look at, for instance, the alerting policy on that velocity alert. You can see nothing interesting has happened recently, but maybe we want to edit it. We've, say, found out that it doubling is not that troubling. I like that. That rhymed. But let's edit that and say maybe if it goes up by 500%, we want to change that. So we can save the condition and save the policy. And if something changes, we'll get alerted about it. I will try one that I think is going to be fun. So it looks like we have just about 1 gigabyte of data. I'm going to set up I'm going to change my storage over quota threshold, which is alert me anytime the amount of data that I have goes above a certain amount. I will edit that, and I'll actually just say, so it's currently at 5 gigabytes. I will set that to, oh, that's still higher than what I have. So we will drop that. There we go. So we'll drop it to below the threshold. We'll save. We'll save that. And I'll keep going through the demo. But at the end, you can see I have email tabs over here. I'm going to see if I can get an alert. So I'm going to see if it will send me an email saying that that thing fired and that I should go and deal with it. Obviously, it may take a little while because, as you can see, the granularity on here, we only kind of check maybe once a day what the bucket size is. But I could do things like database requests or storage requests or function executions that are updated more frequently and get alerted more frequently there. OK. So lastly, we're going to set up budget alerts. So going back, I want to say, this is a server that I'm running myself. I'm paying for this with my personal credit card. I want to know when I'm spending $50 a month. So I've set up an alert that says, notify me when this project is over $50 a month. And I can actually set up percentage alerts as well. So I can say when I'm at $25 a month, $45 a month, and $100 a month. And note, this is just a proactive alert. This isn't going to shut my server down, right? Everything is going to keep going. So that's kind of a two-edged sword, right? Part of it is if your website goes on Hacker News and you get this huge load spike, you obviously don't want the quote-unquote hug of death, where everyone goes on Hacker News and suddenly your website is returning 503s or whatever, 429s or 402s for quota exceeded errors. You want your website to keep working. But on the other side, you kind of want that visibility into, am I going to get this huge credit card bill? If you want, you can also programmatically manage these. So you can send alerts to PubSub. And if you really wanted to, you could actually hook up PubSub to a cloud function to then go anywhere you want. So there are a lot of really nice integrations. I will save this. I'll move it back down to 10. And I'll actually see if I can quota alert myself. So I changed it. I've already spent $18. It should probably send me an email. Oh, my God, Mike, you're blowing through all of your money. You should stop. We will actually pop over. I have filters. So unfortunately, it doesn't look like that storage one fired. But I have kind of a bunch of historical alerts from Stackdriver. here's what they look like. Again, you can see, hey, this is exactly when it started. Here's the project. You can view it. It'll pop you back over to the Stackdriver console, and you can go deal with it. And then once it's resolved, again, you get that nice resolution email. And I'll see if I got another email from the other billing alert. No, it doesn't look like it. But again, here's a previous one that I fired. Sent it, hey, you've hit 100% of your $50 a month budget. Maybe you should go deal with that. OK, let's go back to the slides. So John started the presentation by talking about what Firebase provides to make sure that your organization can use it, right? The fine-grained control that you and your team need so that I'm not mucking around, sending crazy push notifications or screwing with data in the database. I'm only doing exactly what I, in my role, need. John also showed how you can provide a great foundation for compliance and legal requirements through Firebase. So your lawyers are going to be happy with it. And lastly, we just went through how Firebase handles global scale and gives you visibility into everything that's happening in your app, both from a production standpoint as well as a financial standpoint. So yes, Firebase is ready for work. Thank you all very much for coming. John and I will be over in the Firebase, Flutter, and Cloud sandbox after this talk, and we're happy to talk to you about any and all of these needs. Thank you all very much, and enjoy the last day of Google I/O.